Hey, everybody. I am Mark Switage with the Owner's Asset.
And I'm Ro Pugnani, also with the owner's asset.
And today, Ro, we're going to be talking about something that I'm going to say you coined, which is religion. Okay, well, no, not like religion, but re- the two religions, we'll call it, within retirement or retirement planning. So we're seeing a lot of business owners coming to us lately who it feels like they have been successful by accident in terms of their retirement planning. Um, maybe they got a pile of cash amassed through building their business, but they don't really have the plan for how to actually transform that into a paycheck. Um, in the academic world, there are really like two major schools of thought, as you have educated me on this. And can you define what those two are?
Yeah, and thanks for the question. And I kind of fancy myself a researcher, so I try to synthesize large volumes of information in English for our team, our clients. Yeah, so the clients who are coming to us, they probably had either a cash balance plan, and we've taken it over because you can put a lot of money into a cash balance plan. They've been doing their profit share, they've been doing their 401k, where they just sold their business and they finally have this large pool of capital. And it's so interesting. It depends on who you meet first or what you read. You're gonna you're gonna hear two different sides of the same coin. And my view is it is just a sliding scale. It's a false dichotomy to say do this or do that. And the one school of thought, to answer your question, is it's a much more modern school of thought, is the probability based school of thought. It's this notion of the 4% rule, the famous 4% rule, which when interest rates are low goes down. So really interesting there. And then the other is the safety first school of thought, which is coming back. There's a renaissance, and I would say the leader in that field right now is Wade Pfau at retirementresearcher.com. We always want to give credit to the thought leaders who are out there. And I would say really 1979, but really 1994, the safety first school of thought was the dominant school of thought in the retirement community. And so it's interesting to see how this is split alongside the schisms in the industry. And let's break it down in English now. I said I try to break things down in English. The 4% rule is what could happen, and the safety first school of thought is what's guaranteed to happen.
All right, well, that makes sense. So let's start with that probability school. And like for a moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, statistics, significant, you know, significant figures. Like it's all like swirling around in my head. I heard you say, what, 1994 was the birth of what we're calling the birth of this 4% rule. 1994, I was 12 years old. Uh, Okay. Um, so let's talk about this again, this probability school first. And it feels like every advisor on every corner talks about this 4% rule. And I'll tell you, Ro, like I didn't know much about retirement planning. Until you and I linked up. I mean, yeah, I'm the son, grandson, brother of accountants, and we didn't really talk about retirement planning. Um, and so I'm like, it's funny because I have heard of this 4% rule, but for those that may not have, can you tell us a little more about it? What is it? Where does it come from? Did someone just like make up a number or a percentage and say, here you go?
Yeah, not made up, but let's do history, let's do context, let's educate. Our platform is about education first, foremost, and last. Okay, so when I want folks thinking of the owner's asset, I want them thinking, man, I can come to them with questions and we're going to learn together. I'd say there's a handful of really, really important dates in American financial history, right? July 4th, 1776, the birth of the country. 1913 was a crazy year in the history of finance for America because I believe it was 1913. The Federal Reserve and the tax code were both implemented simultaneously. You obviously have 1929 with the Great Depression. And then I would argue 1979 with the advent of the 401k and October of 1994, to answer your question. William Bengen in October of 1994 published a paper in the Journal of Financial Planning. I think it was, yeah, the Journal of Financial Planning, and it was called Determining Safe Withdrawal Rates using historical data. So it wasn't made up. He looked at 70 years of historical data on the S&P, and he looked at a 100% bond portfolio and iterations all the way to a 100% stock portfolio, and determined that the highest probability, right? There's no guarantee in this, right? So the word guarantee and probability are going to keep coming back, right? Right, Mark? And he determined that the highest probability to never run out of money was to withdraw 4% of your value of your portfolio every single year, your starting portfolio, indexed for inflation. So if your portfolio goes down, you go to the number, right? And if the portfolio goes up, you try to stick with the number. He's trying to put in place a floor to never run out of money. But that is actually exactly where the 4% rule came from.
His name was Bengen.
Bengen, Bengen,
Yeah,
William
okay.
Bengen.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm officially a 12-year-old again right now. So, so, so Bangin, let me get this right. Found a number that essentially survived the worst of times.
He said, how do I put in the highest probability of not running out? So it's inherently negative, right? How do I have where do I get the highest probability? Because there's no certainty. There's still periods of time where you ran out of money at 4%. There's periods of time where you ran out of money at 3% withdrawal rates. There's periods of time where you ran out of money at 2.5, 2.6 in his landmark paper. But yeah, he basically was saying, how can I design how can I test for a rule, a guide for people trying to think about, okay, I've amassed this money. This is my life's work from a financial perspective. How do I not run out of money? So yeah, he found out that if you took 4% adjusted for inflation, you had a high probability of not running out of money for about 30 years. What's also interesting is lifespans have gone up significantly since 1994. So the 30 years is also causing problems for retirees, right? Because retirement is now lasting significantly longer than it was before. So basically, the industry took a worst case floor and turned it into the ceiling of what you can take out. There's this very interesting dichotomy that's happening, saying, well, this is the worst case. Now this is the most you can spend, right? And it became this sort of guidepost and almost law of financial planning. And it's not. It's a study of what the past tells us about what may happen in the future. So really, really interesting sort of historical context. And I know you have to jump in, Mark. I'm sorry. What we did see, and I think Morningstar gets a lot of credit here. I read a lot of their research as well. During the great the helicopter money era of sort of post Great Recession, where interest rates came down and then they hit a floor during COVID, you saw a lot of very smart, talented, thoughtful theoreticians and academics come out and say it's really 2.5 because the bond portfolio went to basically zero. And so we'll talk about that and the implications. So Mark, remind me to talk about bonds and their role versus other assets that are out there that could play an interesting ballast, so to speak, there.
Yeah, I mean that's so funny you brought that up. Like 150 basis points, like you just described, could be significant. I mean, we're talking about basically a fixed income world at the retirement stage. That
Yeah, basis
is,
points means percent. Yeah, 1.5%. So it's a significant change. I mean,
yeah.
in your lifestyle in retirement when you thought you got to the finish line.
So let me go back to our bestie Bangin. So he wrote that paper. What are we saying in 1994? So now again, I'm a 12-year-old again. I'm thinking about my grandparents who lived a mile away from us. And I don't think my grandfather actually worked for a really cool company called Western Electric in northern New Jersey. And if memory serves me right, it'd be so cool if a listener is familiar with Western Electric. I believe they are tied to or one of the parent companies to what was Ma Bell, which was then AT&T before they got broken up. But my grandfather was an accountant there, and I don't recall him ever really talking about a 401k. certainly I've never heard of our bestie banging at that point. But like, how did like call it my grandfather's generation stay afloat?
Yeah, great question. They pre 1994, and again, I said 1979 was a watershed moment in U.S. financial history as well. The overwhelming majority of people had pensions. We loved pensions. We had pensions. They were a recruitment tool for by larger companies. The U.S. government had it. The military still has one, and the U.S. was much more insured from a whole life perspective as well. And you had bonds yielding a very different rate of return, rate of yield rather. So you look at the 70s when Paul Volcker running the Fed gets up and says, I'm going to whip inflation, and he raises rates. You could buy 10, the eights in 88 is a famous expression. You could buy government bonds yielding 8% in 1988. So even as early as Bengen's study in 1994, you could get a respectable mid-single digit return, cash flow. Again, try not to use jargon. You could make money holding bonds until the last 10 or 15 years. In fact, interestingly enough, Mark, I don't know if you've heard of the AGG.
I haven't.
The
No, what's the
AGG is the
AGD?
AG. It's the Barclays, and I think it renamed, but it's the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index. It's the equivalent of the S&P 500 in the bond world. So you
Oh,
can get an index of bonds. And it's a broad swath of bonds. I'm talking, just a huge index of all kinds of bonds, and some that are being issued. A lot of stuff that was previously issued that's maybe hard to get, but it's probably the broadest measure of the bond market. And over the last 10 years, I believe as of last end of Q1 of 2026, the 10-year rate of return was about like 0.5% because they were yielding nothing, and then rates came up to fight inflation the last few years, and bond prices go down when rates come up. So if you're holding 40% of your portfolio or a portion in bonds, you've made no money. Okay, let's make that even more challenging. Everyone knows you go to the grocery store, the cost of stuff has gone up. What do we call that, Mark?
annoying.
Exactly, inflation annoying. And so they both start with vowels, so I'll take it as a good answer. But that's exactly right. So actually, in real terms, real means adjusting for the fact that your money buys less stuff. Yeah, bonds have really been tough the last decade, and so it's been a tough spot to be. So to answer your question, what did people do? What did folks like your grandfather did? Yeah, they had pensions. They had a source of guaranteed income coming in, and a lot of pensions have inflation. That's why I brought that up. Have inflation, they're called COLA often, cost of living adjustments, COLA, built into their pensions. So at least they weren't getting poor. They weren't getting wealthier per se, unless they did smart things with that income, continued to buy assets, etc. But yeah, that's what Grandpa had for you, Mark. Is he had a portion of his money in a pension.
Well, and I think there's some generational impacts here for me personally. Now that we're kind of diving into this school of thought, or religion, as we're calling it. So my grandfather had a pension. My mother, his daughter, school teacher, right? She still, she has a pension. I think I hear my mother talk about her pension daily. It is like a source of pride for her because she worked so hard, right? In her mind, she took a salary that wasn't so great. Teachers aren't paid enough, but one of the perks benefits was a pension. And I have heard her talk about the cola, and how sometimes it is not where it should be, and but she truly values that pension. So it feels like, and here I sit without a pension, or before we even started dancing, we're like understanding that this model is still in vogue. So it feels like we're in a world of like, we move from a world, I'll say, from contractual to like contractual meaning a pension, contractual benefit, to one that is like probable. Is that what happened?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Probabilistic, that 4% rule, as we said, is probabilistic, and the first part of that is probable and maybe problematic if you want to be dire about the situation, right? Cool play on words there. I think what's a cool quick aside is why did pensions die? or begin to die. Now there's this phenomenal resurgence, especially in the small business space, and that's what the owner's asset does. Is we work with physicians, small business owners to build them pensions. That doesn't mean you put all your money in your pension. Heck no, right? But probabilistic school, the 4% rule of thought, became probably, and now is slowly becoming problematic. And there's solutions, right? Problematic doesn't mean terminal. Problematic doesn't mean deterministic. It just means that it's part of a broader solution. So why did this happen? There's two reasons, and I don't think this is given enough of a dialogue in the world out there in the pension world. The first is when the 401k was created, it was basically a way for high earning employees to get additional compensation deferred, right? Then it became the mainstream because companies said, well, if I can offer this to more people, I no longer have to fund a pension. Well, some companies still kept their pension, and there's still some very famous pensions out there still in place. TIA, CREF has a great pension, and they're still adding to it, New York Life, right? But what ended up happening is two things simultaneously. The 401k was invented, and also people seem to forget there was basically a lost decade in the stock market right around when that was created. 1968 to 1981, there was three 30% drawdowns over a 12-year period in the S&P 500. So pensions were starting to become underfunded because of a lost decade, and we didn't have alternatives and volatility buffering assets like we have now. And so you have this mosaic, this investment landscape where you have, and this work I'm citing, again, always going to give credit. I'm a big reader, Mark, as you know. Ed Easterling's book at Crestmont Research does a really good job of explaining how bear markets really play out and what they look like. And so 1968 to 1981, you basically have a lost decade. And then the employers get to say, well, I can shift this risk from me to them with this new tool, the 401k. You take two of those together and you move from a world of contractual pensions to the probabilistic world. History tells us that's why that happened, Mark.
Oh, all right. So as we go back to our religions in school, I went to Catholic school, so I guess the two were combined. We have school one is probabilistic, and then what I'm hearing is, kind of the precursor to that was contractual. Is that how we're thinking about this? So like the pension world is the contractual, and called the 401k world is the probable. Do I
Exactly.
have that
That's
right?
exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we put out an episode together, you and I, on contractual versus statement wealth. So a nice reference point for listeners who want to keep kind of figuring out what's best for them. And by the way, quick
Okay.
aside, retirement's literally about what's best for the person, not what's best for the planner or where the market is. It's about what you want to have happen. And so there's no right answers. And anyone who tells you they have the way is wrong. Period. Run from that individual. Run towards autonomy. Run towards dominion over your own choices.
Okay. So, for us at the Owner's Asset, we really focus on retirement strategies for business owners, particularly small business owners. So walk me through a little bit more as to like why the probabilistic world is not a place that we want to be playing.
With all of our money. So I think the answer is actually a bit of both, but let's talk about some of the challenges of the probabilistic world and remind me, Mark, because this is a really good question. There are challenges to the contractual wealth, and we owe it to the listeners, to the people trying to educate themselves of the pros and cons so they can make their own decisions. So the probabilistic world suffers from two major challenges. The first is, and I'm going to use some jargon and then we'll English it up, okay? Because you should know what to Google. And in this world where everybody's an expert overnight because of AI, they should probably know what to ask AI, right? And so it's called sequence of returns risk. What the heck is that? It just seems like a whole bunch of words crammed together. Sequence of returns risk is the idea that the market doesn't only go up, that no asset, with exception of the contractual side, no non-contractual assets only go up, meaning you could retire and the market could go down. You could be a year from retirement and it could be 2007 and then '08 hits and half your money's gone and your retirement is in shambles, right? The other way to think about sequence of returns, most people think, and it's actually, I love when I talk to clients about this, and that's my favorite. My why is to work with clients and have an impact, right? Well, if the market's going to average 10, why can't I pull out 4? right? That's a very common sort of Main Street way of thinking about it. And it turns out if that 10 was 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, then by all means do that. The challenge is the 10 was last year in 2020 or yeah, 2025, maybe I think the S&P was up 24%, right? But it was down. Every third or fourth year since then, it was down. It was exactly flat in 2011. It opened and closed within 25 cents of itself. Peak to trough, it lost 52% in the '08 crash. It lost 51% in 2000. And so that's what sequence returns is a fancy way of saying, yeah, you're going to average 10, but it's a pretty lumpy 10. And if you choose to stop working right before a lump down, uh-oh. So that's the first major drawback of the probabilistic school of thought. And the second one has really come forward in the last 10 or 15 years is bond prices are showing above average volatility and lower yields. So you have the market is always lumpy and has been, and now you see much more interventionalist, a much more active Federal Reserve in the interest rate markets. And so the probabilistic school of thought suffers from those two drawbacks. So what do? Let's talk about the techniques. Probabilistic, and I don't have a problem with this school of thought of saying, okay, let's do a Monte Carlo. A Monte Carlo is a fancy way of saying, let's take one set of returns and then stress test them. Let's say the market goes as a bull market, then a bear market, and interest rates are up and interest rates are down, and every combination they're in, and do it over different years and different start dates and all this kind of stuff. You back into a probability. You can tell someone, you can offer leadership and say, well, you got a 96% chance of not running out of money at the 4% rule with your current wealth. Okay, but that means there's a 4% chance you're going to run out of money. Let me phrase it this way to you, Mark. Would you get on an airplane? I mean, Spirit just closed. Would you get on an airplane if the pilot was like, look, for every 100 flights, 4 of these are going to crash. Feel free to get on or off the plane.
Okay. First off, yeah, for our listeners, I am I am very upset about Spirit's. Well, I guess departure is the wrong word to use. Uh, uh, the loss of Spirit in my life, Spirit Airlines. So I am currently going through a moment. I flew them 26 times last year. I think I spent a combined $26 for those flights, but I'm still so no. To your question, I would not get on Spirit or any other airline if I knew there was a 4% chance that I would not safely make it to my destination. I wouldn't even get on the plane. I wouldn't take that risk.
And therein lies the problem with modern retirement planning, right? Financial planning is a much bigger concept. Cash flow management, tax, investments, right? But retirement planning suffers from. Doesn't mean you throw it out the window, because the goal is to know your basic needs are met and then have as much as you can for the lifestyle you've earned. So you need there. It's a good starting point. It's just an incomplete analysis, right? So I think that answers, I hope, Mark, and please ask questions. Does that answer what probabilistic means? It's the chance that you may run out. It's assigning a probability to what could happen, what may happen. And the first drawback was markets are lumpy. The second drawback is interest rates are lower than long-term means and have gotten more volatile. And yeah, if you retire and 6 months later the market has a natural repricing event, your retirement's gone. And that's scary. So that's kind of that school of thought. Now let's talk about the pros. The pros of it are, you're solving for something specific. It is a good guidepost. It does get to tell you the probabilities of something happening, right? Because there's two levers to pull, right? There's what the market does, which no one can control, and then there's your spending. And so there's ways to manage that behaviorally. But the pros are, at least you have a guidepost. That's nice. So,
Yeah, I gotta tell you, Ro, like this is this is complicated. Um, look, I'm a repeat business owner, business founder. I'm spending all my time working on my company. And I got to tell you, my retirement is like not something that I seek to actively manage, if that makes sense, or plan to actively manage.
yeah. So
Like, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, it just it feels like, again, as a business owner, I'm always thinking about opportunity cost. My cost to focus on A versus B. This feels like B in the probabilistic world, right? Like, what is my cost of doing that? It's going to come at the cost of maybe something I could be doing within my business. I'm going to generate more returns focused on my business or businesses than I will on focusing on on probabilistic environment of, call it a 401k world. It just, and plus it's complicated. It makes me feel uncomfortable, frankly.
I love that. And that's exactly right. And what we see, and this is the psychology of the business owner. Again, our markets are physicians and business owners because physicians don't view themselves as business owners, but they are. If you're a 1099, a locum physician, or a physician who has an outpatient surgical practice in addition to your typical hospital role, you're a business owner, right? Yeah, most business owners think their retirement plan is when they sell their business. Well, okay, there's even more unknowns there than the probabilistic world. And so what we do to add clarity, right? To offer perspective and then ultimately guidance, right? The clarity is you can get a tax deduction to build the contractual side today, right? And we should start talking about the contractual side in a minute, but you're right, Mark. This is very like emotionally vexing and challenging to be like this unknown 20 years from now. I don't know if I'm going to be alive. I don't know what taxes are. I don't know if I can sell my business. I don't know how to do all this. And so there's really good rules that you can put in place to follow. And that's what I hope we unpack in today's episode about that. But you're right to feel that way. I'm a small business owner. Obviously, you and I work together. I feel the exact same way. So what are you and I going to do? As we grow, we will start to build the contractual side as well, right? So we have the probabilistic side. We contribute to 401ks and profit shares. So those are the probabilistic sides. Building our business is the biggest investment we can make in the probabilistic side, right? We do that. We advance our business by serving our clients. Well, it turns out that along the way, there are at least three ways to start building the other side of the coin. We started this as religion, two sides of the same coin. Well, let's worship at the altar of the other side. And by the way, this is a super cool analogy, this religious thing. All religions have dichotomy in them, right? Heaven, hell, Janus in mythology, right? Janus, the two-faced nature of things, right? There's good and evil in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. So it's natural to talk about the other side of the coin, right? Because all of finance collapses to opportunity cost. All of finance collapses to if you spend a dollar here, it may not be there. So I love the nature of this dialogue. So yeah, Mark, I hear you. I feel a lot of anxiety about retirement as well, but let's talk about those solutions. Oh God, don't get me going on this, but here we go, man. Buckle up. Social Security, everybody is counting on it and loves it, yet everybody hates annuities. What's so interesting is Social Security is basically an inflation indexed annuity. Whoa, and that's just so funny. But people say, I'm never going to buy an annuity. Well, but you're planning on one in your retirement. It's called Social Security. No one frames it the right way. No one's teaching or talking about it the right way. But people feel this warm blanket of, well, at least I can take Social Security.